Namaskar to all the viewers. I'm Dr. Rajiv Chhibber. I'm Vice President with Sajanand Medical Technologies. We are a global leader and developer of minimally invasive coronary stent systems. I also happen to be the joint coordinator for IMED, which is the Association of Indian Medical Devices, as well as the chair of the MedTech Policy Committee of ASSOCHAM. And I also represent PSD Chambers of Commerce for the Medical Devices Committee. Friends, today we have a very invigorating topic that I guess has been organized by the symposia, and over the last 2 days, I'm sure a lot of stalwarts from the government and the private sector would have had given good deliberations towards how medical device space in India has evolved. This healthcare has now been a boom which everyone has been looking forward to, especially from a global perspective. And India has been in the fulcrum of this entire healthcare innovation since COVID. But even beyond COVID, it was one of the largest hubs that we were looking upon up to. So, friends, the COVID-19 outbreak has managed to teach us the importance of local manufacturing, and domestic industry needs to, in India, really rid import dependency, which has gone beyond 75 to 80% right now in the medtech sector. And I'm sure, following the Honorable Prime Minister's clarion call of Jai Anusandhan from the Red Fort on Independence Day, we would like to assure from the Indian medical device industries that we are committed to promote ourselves as a key manufacturing destination of quality medical devices, taking India to become not only Atmanirbhar in the medtech hub, but also one of the best hubs of medical device technologies that would be looked up globally. We all have seen over the last 2.5 to 3 years now how COVID-19 has impacted the entire world, and it's really slowed down. But what has actually been able to garner at this point of time was the healthcare sector. The sector became the epicenter, which was the worst affected sector as such, but then slowly grew up to become the thing to go up to when we looked at medical devices, or when we looked at even basic healthcare services to be rendered to a common man. In India, while the government had taken numerous measures to successfully slow down the spread of the virus in the initial months of the pandemic had uncovered, in fact, the stark inadequacies of our healthcare system. The COVID-19 pandemic, it brought forth the need to focus on more facets that were required to really spruce up our healthcare system. It was required to really have a new working order to really put impetus on the healthcare delivery plan that India was going to have. And that was the main thing that our government fortunately thought of, which was ensuring access of healthcare to all. It was not only from a pharmaceutical perspective, it was not only from a hospital perspective, but it was also from the medical devices perspective. And largely, sometimes I feel from a personal, side, that medical devices was not that talked about earlier. In fact, when a common man talks about having a regular fever or being diagnosed, people seldom forget that the first thing that diagnoses you of a particular ailment is that thermometer, the basic thing. And that thermometer is the very basic medical device, which then gives you a revelation of your disease. So I guess as healthcare providers continue to put the colossal efforts of fighting against the pandemic, and they still do. The pandemic is not over. We still have seen how sporadic incidences in China are still coming back, and there has been another waves by waves which are really being predicted by our health economists. But we did find ways to manage the vulnerable and the affected. The reverberations of the current crisis were really felt across entire spectrum, and that was the time then people understood that the basic thing as medical devices, and to be honest, it's not really basic as I'm telling you, but things as medical devices became the epicenter, or as our prime minister said, the sunshine sector in healthcare is now going to be medical devices. India had the ability to deal with these new and accentuated challenges, and our resilience determined our success. Today, what we sit on in 2022 was something that we were determined to tackle and take forward in 2020 and 2021, really giving us the normalcy post COVID. See, if we talk about the challenges, it is expected that the current scenario, coupled with the vision of digitalization in healthcare, as well as the National Health Mission or the Ayushman Bharat mission, has given a plethora of opportunities for Indian healthcare to be transformed. But then the most important thing which I thought could have been talked about over the last 2 years was the entire boost to local manufacturing as well as the R&D products and the treatment of healthcare outcomes that really came out glaringly. And this is what the topic talks about. We need to talk about today what has been the deficiencies in the medtech sector, or if I would like to term it in a very different way than the conference organizers, I would like to really say, why is India lacking in medical device manufacturing despite being one of the fastest growing healthcare markets? So today's topic and today's real time, ability to understand healthcare is something that has really taken us two steps back to really think on how are we going to look at this 5 trillion economy that the prime minister talked about, the delicate balance between the economic and social development, and also how community centric and industry centric approaches will have a massive outcome in the healthcare sector, especially because the medtech or the medical devices sector in India has to grow in tandem with its big brother, the pharmaceutical sector. So, India is massively, as I said earlier, also India is massively import dependent. It's something when you look at medical devices, we are an import dependent country right from the early 80s till now. And although there's been lot of innovation, there's been a lot of medtech companies who've really had the chance to make India or the Indian flag shine, we still have an adequate number of areas where we are still import dependent. And this is to be honest, the US is the largest exporter of medical devices. This is followed by China, Germany, Netherlands, Singapore. And we have now slowly and slowly started gearing up to this particular clarion call. And this clarion call is really to look how medical devices could now be really, really Atmanirbhar or self-reliant. So I would just like to take everyone back to towards maybe 2014-15. The government of India at that time included medical device sector in its ambitious Make in India program. Since then, there's been various policy initiatives by the government to address the ecosystem requirements, including the rollout of the new medical devices rules in 2017. And now, in fact, in 2022, we still have, how medical devices will be regulated by the Drug Controller General of India, the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, and the Department of Pharmaceuticals looking at it. To, in fact, even the introduction of a 100% FDI policy to attract not only foreign investments, but also to look at how India as a destination could be a manufacturing destination. The government addressed infrastructure gaps by setting up medical devices parks. And fortunately, today, apart from the existing medical devices clusters and the two biggest medical devices parks, which is the Andhra Pradesh Medical Tech Zone, as well as the medical devices park in Telangana, in just next to Hyderabad, there's been an enough impetus on also developing four new medical devices park, which is in Himachal Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, and Tamil Nadu. So these have been giving, or these are addressing infrastructure gaps by setting up, not only incubators, not only boosting innovation in the support towards medical device requirements, but also is giving that kind of a conducive atmosphere to even medtech startups. And these medtech startups are largely, gadget enabled medtech startups that we're looking at. And the unpredictability and the lack of confidence that the domestic manufacturers and importers had is now really getting slightly skewed. So that particular apprehension is now being addressed with the quality, with the kind of innovation and the kind of impetus that the government itself has really added value towards the medical device manufacturing sector. See, for India, manufacturing has been valued at the percentage of GDP largely, and in fact in 2019, if I recall, it was around 13.72% of the GDP. The government now hopes, and with the kind of policies, and especially the PLI, the production link incentive schemes, and other schemes which strengthen the pharmaceutical sector, we do hope that we would be able to reduce the dependence on imports, improve the current low localization rate which we were really grappling on, and which will eventually help to enhance the value addition not only in the country but also India as a global medtech hub to be looked at. So the larger aspect when we look at is to really have clear priority setting processes. These need to be evidence-based decision makings if the medtech sector really has to shine through. There need to be transparent processes, and I'm sure the government and we from the industry have also looked at it in a similar way, that these processes have looked into the consideration of not only the vulnerable population groups but also is going to make use of the latest and the efficient devices, technologies that are going through evaluations and strategic designs that India is going to make a difference on. We had the honorable prime minister, we've had on various occasions talk about the fundamentals of how India is now going to be a strong and a supportive economy towards healthcare. But yes, what we still need to look at from a domestic manufacturing or a company perspective is how the right fiscal announcements, which were made in 2020, which were carried forward in the union budget of 2021 and then in 2022, will really be able to make a decisive, impartial kind of a stage where Indian medtech churns out the tide towards ridding import dependency, and we slowly develop our own strengths with also MNCs being a part of it. Because now with MNCs coming into this mode of investing in India, we've got glaring examples of GE, Philips, Medtronic, Boston Scientific. These are bigger companies and bigger names who've started investing, who've started also putting R&D centers in India. So it's going to be a joint PPP mode. And to be honest, it's not the traditional public-private partnership mode that I'm talking about. It is more largely looking at how partnership for a public purpose to achieve healthcare would really encourage the industry to play a catalyzing role. The other thing that I presume everyone will be in sync when we talk about certain areas that the government needs to really spruce up, or the medtech manufacturers or the domestic manufacturers is really wanting to spruce up, is expanding the ecosystem within the state, within the nation itself, which means that it is critical to build a large market for domestic products. We need to have the government, we need to have the domestic market large enough so that we have new pharma and medical device not only being bought through the government but also reaching out from the government to a larger population. So which means what we did with the pharmaceuticals when we provided the vaccinations during COVID, the huge Sankat Mochan Hanuman approach that we had, where we actually became the givers to a larger population globally, is a similar kind of a step that we would want the not only the government but also the industry to join hand and increase that ecosystem so that we really become a big consumption market with sufficient average sale prices and better price procedures, so that even schemes like CGHS, even schemes like the Ayushman Bharat scheme or state government schemes. We've got enough state government schemes in Gujarat, in Telangana, in Andhra Pradesh, in Maharashtra. These become good price payers, and that needs to be replicated not only at a national level but at a state level. So the schemes need to accept more quality domestic products so that a larger domestic market can be supported, and also ensure timely payments. Because unless payments are really rendered via hospitals or via the schemes, the R&D component within the medtech sector really goes for a toss. And we genuinely would not be, as companies or as industry, would not be able to put in that innovation quotient if we don't have the supply of not only raw materials and policies, but also the supply of liquid, money, which helps us to really grow. Further, I think India can really look at developing a local WIPO index, which can really measure the R&D in the healthcare sector. So India is presently measured at a US 1 trillion economy, and however, roughly it's only 0.7% that is spent on R&D, which means that it's only minimally up to 20 to 30 billion dollars that we end up spending on R&D in this particular 1 trillion economy. And you can imagine the prime minister giving a clarion call for a 5 trillion economy. If that component really increases, if this amount is qualitatively spent, then India can work with the medtech and the pharma companies to develop products which are market driven, which can really have an impact globally, and which can really rethink on how the medtech sector can be tapped not only within the country but outside the country. We can, I mean, just look at the examples from how Covaxin and Covishield were able to really catch up on the entire R&D segment. We need to look at a similar kind of a segment to be looked at. Another thing that we have a potential that the country can really pump in is that we can utilize our potential for unlocking IT and IT enabled healthcare systems and getting the private sector involved in disease demographic profiling for each citizen. This would have, not only a digital record for disease ailments, but also get more focused on addressing immediate policy issues, which can then be formulated based on the disease burden in a particular area, in a particular region or a district, and then critical supplies and manufacturing could be mooted in that sense. Typically, what we did during the COVID time was to create a crow's nest or to create something which looked at where there was more catchment and where there was need to replenish the supplies to that particular area. If you look at it, India at that time was really deficient in the production of PPE kits, masks. You talk about diagnostic kits, you talk about COVID kits, you talk about even your regular, eyewear and high-end, hazmat suits, etc. Today, we are really proud that it's around over 150 companies in India, collaboration with global entities coming out with this kind of a production that India do not has a lacuna of any of these products. Today, it's at the click of our mouses that we can identify that if a particular state or a particular section really needs to have medtech devices or pharmaceutical formulations sent across because of an outbreak, it's very easy to ferry them across. The supply chains were managed well. We need to have a similar kind of an approach, and this will be easier if we actually look at how the success story post the pandemic was written because of innovation and manufacturing. It was immediately depend upon India that how would India be able to take it forward if there is going to be a similar Mahem in the healthcare sector. But I would congratulate not only the government of India, the Honorable Prime Minister, but also give a pat on the back to the local as well as the domestic manufacturers who are not only in the pharmaceutical sphere, but also in the medtech sphere to really spruce up the kind of infrastructure base, robust manufacturing ecosystem, and provide the required world-class standard products, testing, and facilities that built momentum towards the entire value chain being looked up by India and the global population. So, I mean, I really think that this is something which we can really talk about at length. But yes, these are areas where we too need to look at, because in the absence of a supportive infrastructure and supply chain network, we will not be able to take forward the entire healthcare risk that India had almost like 2 to 3 years back. Let me now take you to areas where we would also want to have some kind of an economic impetus. See, we all know that we would largely drive the economy when we have a safe inverted duty structure favoring the imports of finished goods. So, the import duties on raw materials and components are generally higher than those on finished products. So just to give, in other words, and I'm sure a lot of people in this audience would know about it, but in other words, there is a low entry barrier for finished medical goods and equipments. And this naturally incentivizes players in the medical device sector to bring in complete standalone products into the country instead of raw materials and inputs that they could possibly use to innovatively manufacture a completely new product by themselves. So this entire Make in India spiel goes to gallows when we look at how we are favoring imported finished goods or second-hand or refurbished finished goods that come to India. In the process, many players effectively become traders and not really manufacturers with respect to several medical devices. The other thing that I think we need to really talk upon is the peculiar nature of the domestic market itself. Even as India, being a high population and a high disease burden country, from the point of view of manufacturers of high-end and technologically sophisticated medical devices, there is sufficient demand domestically for them to make investments and run full-fledged operations. So when I said we need to increase the domestic demand earlier, it was it was basically to look at the peculiar domestic market that we have never been able to really expand. So whatever demands that is there, it is limited to hospitals and healthcare facilities, as well as individuals and families in metros and big cities in India are consuming. So in fact, hospitals in non-metro cities are likely to opt for inexpensive products and devices compared to high-end products stemming from the affordability issues itself. So therefore, besides the usual risks associated with the very tenure of a nascent business venture, the long-term sustainability within the country has often played on the minds of the manufacturers within the country. So we need to really push that domestic nature of the market so that we can end up being larger producers for the domestic sector itself. Then let me go to another very important point, which I think everyone would also talk about, is the lack of relevant educational and skill base. We've seen how a lot of medtech companies and startup companies grapple with the set of experts which they need to hire. And these experts are largely B Pharma, M Pharma graduates who do not talk about engineered medical devices. Now, engineering is a very important aspect that needs to be understood when you talk about medical devices. And although India produces one of the largest number of STEM graduates, which includes engineers, there is a clear lack of alignment between biomedical education and bioengineering disciplines. So the fourth largest medical device manufacturer in Asia is India, but unfortunately there are only 217 biomedical engineering colleges in the country, which offers anything between a regular course on medtech or something which all is only and only looking at the prism of pharmaceuticals. Now, so according to an education sector tracking portal, and a survey done by the AMTZ, there are less than 20 courses in these 217 biomedical engineering colleges that are related to biotechnology engineering fields itself. And where we lack, I today cannot hire someone without thinking of the fact that I need to give this particular person at least 6 months to 10 months of granular medtech training for him or her to understand what the medical device ecosystem is going to be. And unfortunately, science graduates in India do not look at the medical device sector as one of those sectors where they would want to carve out a particular career into. So that's something which we need to look at, and this is really called, when we talk about it, this is really called an industry academia linkage that needs to be built strong, and the talent pool needs to be curtailed in such a manner that the medtech industry gets the best initially and then moves to the pharmaceutical industry. So innovation in manufacturing is highly dependent on skilled resources, and the need to establish these structured curriculums at university levels for specializing in medical devices development and engineering is amply important. I mean, I would really say it's something that Niti Aayog, it's something that UGC needs to really talk to the medical device industry, set up centers of excellence, provide medical technology training and placements. NIPERS or NIMERS, which are coming up, they can set up a dedicated training institute to focus on education and research in high tech device manufacturing. So the industry academia linkage is another sector that I would want to really talk about. Fifth, is a very important thing that I want to talk about is the government should aggressively focus on creating a vibrant R&D environment in the country. So this also facilitates not only the industry academia that I talked about, but also within the government, a government industry R&D facilitation. The BIREX of the world have started moving out and reaching out to the industry, but then we need more of them, and not only under the Science and Technology Ministry, but also within the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. So, across all stages of product development, from conception to design to prototyping to validating to testing, research, innovation, we should, from the industry, feel that there is some kind of a push, not only from the government, but also we receive some kind of innovation in research that will help us to take it forward. See, new age healthcare and medtech startups, they should also be incentivized to join forces with companies like us to especially in the emerging technology sector or the artificial AI intelligence sector, to talk about how we will be able to spruce up the entire R&D environment. Unfortunately, R&D is something that is being given a back foot whenever we talk about economic spending. And while there is R&D happening in space, there is R&D happening in other technologies in the AI sector. Unfortunately, the same is not being plowed back within the medtech sector itself. So I think the government needs to work with the industry to focus on a vibrant R&D ecosystem, facilitate that kind of R&D, and also incentivize and issue grants so that companies within the ecosystem can actually make India grow. Another thing that the government did in 2020 and then largely followed it up was a good thing that can still be spruced up, is to consider targeted procurement of local companies for devices and equipment for which there is sufficient local capacity and competition available in the country. So that actually, this would give boost to local production as well as innovation. So last year, the DPIIT, which is the Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade at the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, they had notified enough medtech and IVD devices for this particular purpose. So I think this is a promising development, and the protection of IP and patents, they must be rigorously pursued and implemented by DPIIT so that local companies like us, local medtech environment can really be strengthened, and we would be able to promote indigenous innovation in the medtech sector. This is very important because this framework needs to recognize how incremental innovation and setting up of seed capital funds are really going to facilitate the R&D, the clinical trials, and the certification costs that are really incurred in critical medical device segments. And I'm talking about the class C and class D high-end medical device areas. For instance, for a particular stent, the entire fulcrum of an ecosystem requires R&D, requires rigorous clinical trials, and not only rigorous trials within the country, but also multi-country rigorous trials that need to be performed, the certifications, whether it is to secure a European Union certification or a JAP FDA or a US FDA or even Brazil and Visa, etc. That requires huge amount of investments by medtech companies, and sometimes that becomes detrimental for companies like us to really move forward and then look at that kind of a global population that we have the capability to serve, but get entangled between the entire cost and the entire clinical trial and certification arena that takes us two steps back. So largely what I'm trying to tell you is that these need to be really aligned, and the public procurement policy and the local production capabilities need to be aligned so that there is a larger ecosystem that can be developed. uh, the other thing that could really help is that the institution like Ayushman Bharat, that needs to be a national and a centralized reimbursement agency. We do agree that health is a state subject, but what happens is that when it comes to a reimbursement agency at a local or at a national level, there the idea is to have a commonly recognized agency that will simplify reimbursement processes, accepts upgradation of technology, R&D in the medtech sector, and has provisions to include newer devices and versions in the reimbursement sector. This is very, very important because, if we look at examples of countries like France, countries like Japan, USA, UK, they have really made provisions to include newer versions or newer generations of medical devices being available in their centralized reimbursement system itself, so that adequate amount of population gets the best possible device and the better healthcare possibilities and outcomes are then achieved. So I think uh, apart from one health, one care, one nation, which the Prime Minister thought of, we would need to really think of having a single national and centralized reimbursement agency that could really have an acceptance towards upgradation of technology, upgradation of R&D, and acceptance of newer generation of devices that are going to be available in the next coming years. So I think that's something which is really, really important, and the key factors that influence the purchase of decision of medical device establishments while buying from a local player, while vis-a-vis buying from a large MNC, can really differentiate when we have a sound ecosystem, which can really talk about how we can we can really align our vision of a new medtech or a new medical device hub for India. Another thing which I would like to just point out is a couple of immediate things that we can really reach out to, and these range from a huge support angle that could be required. And these immediate things is like a like as I talked about, a clear and well defined national level policy document or a roadmap which defines the short term, medium, and the long term goals of this particular sector. While we've got well defined rules and roles for the various ministries, but unfortunately, there's so much of overlap because medical devices as such fall into almost various ministry clusters, starting from Ministry of Health and Family Welfare to the Department of Pharmaceuticals to the Ministry of Commerce, where DPIIT as well as the import policy is governed upon, to even smaller aspects of regulations which are taken care by different ministries for pollution control, for water bodies, etc. So that all needs to be really, really reinvigorated to look at how it can dovetail the fine lines of a requirement of potential overlap that could be curbed. When we talk about a single window, we still are yet to see a single window throughout the nation because of the fact that health is a state subject. We go down to a state, and there that state versus center uh, issues start happening. The other thing is we need to reinitiate the R&D benefits, which means reduction of duty on import of raw materials and components for manufacturing need to be really rethought by the government. Another point that I could think of off the cuff is revisiting the potential purchase for Make in India goods under the PPO order that I talked about. But that gives a stimulus for domestic companies to really be there with government tenders. We've got glaring examples where sometimes the government or bureaucrats do not find merit in localized manufacturing, and they would go for US FDA, they would go for other certification markings. If we have that kind of an ecosystem which really talks about quality medical devices and medical and pharmaceutical products, we would not even go to the level to talk about another governed or another country governed certification to be applicable in India. So we need to really rethink on how the US FDAs and the CEs can be rethought of, and how the Drug Controller General of India certifications can be made more stringent. And mind you, when I say this, we from the medical devices industry are requesting the government to regulate us, which is the opposite, where most of the industries will not want them to be regulated. We would want ourselves to be regulated. You know, again, as I talked about, we need fee support for various certifications, USFDA, CE certifications, and inspections that happen on a regular basis. These are not feasible for startup ecosystems, for really those medical device companies who have grown to a level but want to become a global medtech company. Also, we also need to position India as a big consumption market with sufficient average sale prices, better procedure prices, and also schemes need to also tap the domestic innovations that are available. And most importantly, no requirement of multiple testing in should be there in the country. Instead, we can focus on developing domestic prowess of laboratory infrastructure, of innovation and R&D and manufacturing, so that everyone can really go down to a particular lab which is designated by the government, have the kind of innovation and the kind of ecosystem built where our manufacturing can also go into low cost manufacturing. And that is why India today, because of this, we have emerged as one of the fastest growing healthcare markets in the world, where we are showing impressive results as of now, which also includes the medtech sector. In fact, the medtech sector or the medical device market is said to be the fourth largest in Asia, and we feature among the top 20 markets globally. Yet, while the healthcare sector has, as whole, has become a very large sector because of its revenue and employment, the medtech sector still, as I said, grapples with 80% of import dependency that we have. And we need to move from import dependency to import redundancy. And there we need to have a clear healthcare, policy that also has medical devices catalyzed into it. The growth of a well developed and well oiled system can only happen when we have an ecosystem which looks into all 360-degree angles. So, in the end, I mean, I do understand that I've talked about a lot of important points, a lot of important areas that we can look at it. But I would still want to say that the medtech sector has now become one of those sectors that is now being established as one of those sectors which can really take India to be a global player to reach this $5 trillion economy. The narrative needs to get further pushed, not only by Make in India, but Buy in India, but also Made in India for the world. So the key influencers that which will be able to make brand India survive needs to be really, really reconsidered. Strategic design, strategic policies that need to be really thought over, needs to be really mucked up by all ministries in conjunction with the stakeholders, which inevitably involves the medical device industry. So I think we have in front of us a clearly spelled agenda that will take India to seize this opportunity to revive the domestic industry, so that India ensures self-sufficiency, accessibility, availability, affordability in healthcare, while providing at par quality medical devices globally. Thank you very much. And I do hope that you will all be able to benefit from this particular session. I understand that a lot of stalwarts would have talked, but my 2 ounces here would really make a difference when we talk about this sector really growing. Thank you very much.